Hey everyone, so in today's video we are going to be exploring a higher speed loading strategy for the foot and ankle complex, particularly looking at how we can generate a higher speed contraction through the ankle plantar flexors in a position that doesn't concentrate the demand through the ankle plantar flexors. So this can be a really nice early loading strategy during the early, middle or later phases of rehab, depending on the sensitivity level of the client and how well they can tolerate load through the ankle plantar flexors. But generally, because you are not in a standing position here, where all the mass and force is acting through the ankle and the foot, this is generally much more tolerable for the client to start refamiliarizing themselves with a higher speed contraction through the ankle plantar flexors and almost trying to initiate that spring-like behavior through the ankle plantar flexors. So it can be really helpful if, for example, you have a client that is planning on returning to a higher speed activity like running, any activity involving a higher speed contraction through the foot and the ankle. Generally, when we're trying to, because there's so many exercises you can use, so generally when you're trying to understand whether or not the utility of a certain exercise is warranted, you need to deconstruct the goal task of the client or deconstruct the aggravating task of the client. So if the client, for example, says they have, and sometimes they're the same, the goal task can be the aggravating task. Let's say, for example, you have a runner who's experiencing foot and ankle pain during a run, and that's what's aggravating them. So they want to get back running. Then the aggravating task is the same as the goal task. They might not have any pain during lower speed, lower load activities. And so you may reorganize or you may implement something like this earlier on during the rehab process. But let's say, for example, you have a client that wants to get back running, but they're currently unable to run and they have pain when they're just going for a walk. That's a scenario where you may not want to implement this straight away. There may be other things that you need to do early on in the rehab process, and you might incorporate something like this during the middle to later phases of rehab. So you can see here that we're set up in a supine position with some hip flexion short of 90 degrees, some knee flexion and some ankle plantar flexion here. But because we're going to be bridging up into a position, that shin is going to come into a position where it's more parallel to the ground. But generally, when we are in this bridge position, like we've spoken about many times before, we're going to have a demand on the ankle plantar flexors, the knee flexors and the hip extensors. So what we're going to show you first here is just the client here getting into a bridge position. So we're bridging up, and in this position here now we have hip extension. We're a couple of inches off the ground, but all we're going to be doing here now, and this is what we will typically begin with, is a active dorsiflexion of the ankle and then a rapid plantar flexion against the wall. So we're getting a little bit of shock through the foot and ankle complex. We're putting a little bit of a higher speed demand, contractile demand on the ankle plantar flexors, but we're not leaving the wall yet. We're not pushing through the metatarsal heads to lift off the wall and catch. That's something that we can progress to, but that's generally how the progression will go. We're going to generate a rapid ankle plantar flexion movement into the wall, and typically we will start at a lower speed, we'll reset, and then we'll start moving that ankle much faster, and then we'll progress into a lifting off the wall. So you'll see what this looks like here. We're going to have this client begin to dorsiflex, and then we're going to have them rapidly plantar flex into the wall. And you'll see that will naturally couple with some hip extension as well. So you're getting that coordination between the ankle plantar flexors, the hip extensors, and because we're holding this position, there's going to be some load through the knee flexors as well. So generally, clients will be able to tolerate this for a lot more repetitions, higher repetitions. So I'll generally, with clients, go to 15, 20 plus repetitions here to really expose those ankle plantar flexors to that higher speed load, but under lower force demands because we're not in a standing position. Then what we want to progress to is a rapid plantar flexion with a lift off. And how I usually like to do this is At the beginning, I'll have the client land with a whole foot. I don't really put a huge amount of focus on the landing because I just want to bring their attention to the more concentric component of the strategy here, and just really generating that force and not thinking about how they're going to land. So you'll see here in Connor's case, he's pushing and landing on the forefoot. That's something that we can progress to as well. It just puts, again, another element of higher speed demand on the ankle plantar flexors to control that shock against the wall, because that movement against the wall is going to try to create ankle dorsiflexion. It's going to just challenge the spring-like behavior of the calves here, specifically the soleus with a bent knee position here, but again the gastroc will contribute to knee flexion too. So generally we're just getting that load through the ankle plantar flexors and the Achilles as well. Now what you can do here, you'll see there that we're increasing it to a much bigger push-off. In order to do that, so generally just to talk about the early motion here, if I go back to the kind of the lower level strategy. When we are initially doing it, we just want a small push-off so that we are concentrating that focus around the foot and the ankle, even though, yes, we're getting the hip, the knee and the ankle all involved here. But then once we push off harder to try and get more space between the foot and the wall here, we're increasing the flight time, if you like. That's when we're going to require a lot more contribution from the hip extensors, okay? So there we're going to get more ankle plantar flexors and more of an active hip extension component as well. And then, like I said, we will progress to a catch with the forefoot. So start submaximal, like you're going to see here, push and catch, push and catch, push and catch. And again, I'll generally continue to push that until the point where the client says that they're experiencing a moderate burning sensation through the ankle plantar flexors. Again, because we're not really dealing with high levels of force in this position here, I like to really push the client to the point where they're experiencing a moderate level of fatigue through the ankle plantar flexors here. Of course, you're going to feel the hip extensors, you're going to feel the knee flexors as well. But a really nice strategy to begin exposing the foot and ankle tissues to that higher speed contraction. You can certainly do this in standing as well. It's just with a single leg, it's harder to dorsiflex that ankle and then move through a rapid ankle plantar flexion motion into the ground. It's much easier to do it on two legs with a little bit of support in standing. But I do find that the position here on the wall, again, just helps to increase that confidence because, again, like we've mentioned many, many times, you are ultimately giving the client the opportunity to share some of that demand with the knee flexors and hip extensors, even though the intention is on the ankle. Giving the client the opportunity to share some of that demand into the knee and into the hip can almost reduce their fear, reduce the anxiety around concentrating that demand into the foot and the ankle, which you're going to get in a standing position as well. So a really nice strategy to incorporate here into the early, middle or later phases. But remember that you're not just going to throw this at the clients for no apparent reason. You have to explain to the client why you're doing what you're doing. And so if they are progressing back to a task that involves higher speed activity where the external forces are being rapidly applied to the body, meaning that the muscular tissues need to generate internal forces at a higher speed, then this is a great strategy because we're still getting a higher speed contraction, but under lower force demands because we're in a supine position. So really easy to implement during the early phases of rehab. And of course, you can be a bit more intentional with the first metatarsal head push, particularly when you can alter the position of the foot here as well, not during the lift-off phase, but during the early phase here where we are just dorsiflexing and rapidly plantar flexing. What you can do is you can, like we've gone through in previous strategies, you can drive that knee medially, pre-position immediately, so it's going to drag the distribution of weight into the medial foot. You're going to get a lot more load and push through the first metatarsal head. It can help to facilitate foot pronation, but not always. You need to have the ability to pronate the foot in order to experience that pronation. Sometimes you'll have a client, for example, with a really supinated foot. You'll drive that knee medially, and all it will do is it will just supinate the foot even further. It'll almost look like they're driving the lateral ankle even more laterally as you drive that knee medially. So when you drive the knee medially, you need to have the space for the subtalar joints to move. You need to have the space for the calcaneus to evert, for the talus to drive medially, and for that navicular to drop, for the lengthening of the medial arch to occur. So that's where, if for example, you're trying to use this to facilitate or to challenge the foot and ankle tissues in a position of pronation, but the client doesn't have pronation, then you may also want to combine this with a strategy to expand pronation range of motion. But you can certainly do that to bias the foot towards pronation. You can then drive the knee laterally to bias a little bit more supination as well. And like I said, this would be utilized more for this strategy here, where we're not really getting a lift off. But then as you're progressing to the actual lift off, that's when we'll want to keep the knee in line with the hip, the knee in line with the ankle, and just get that more sagittal plane dominant motion of the ankle plantar flexors, while the ankle and foot is in more of a mid-range position. So we're driving almost through the second metatarsal head. Okay, so just a really nice way to add a layer of speed demand on top of these more supine wall bridge strategies.